Good morning. Beginning today, we are going to take a break from the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to do this for about a month or so. We're doing this for a couple of reasons. In the first place, we have some pretty significant days coming up, things like Mother's Day, which is next Sunday, and then the Sunday after that is graduation Sunday. And we need to attend to those things. I don't want us to overlook our moms or our grads, so we need to remember to support them in the next few weeks. And in the second place, we're taking a break from Matthew because our shepherds here at GCC have asked me, in the season of social disruption, with so much uncertainty and angst and so many different things going on, to spend a little time preaching on hope. So what is biblical hope? How can that help us right now? We know a lot of us are really struggling, and yet we know that God cares for us, that He created us to be a people of hope. So how can we lean into that? How can we make sure that even right now we are a hopeful people? And so I spent several days this last week thinking through what does the Bible have to say about hope. And I decided if we're going to do this mini-series, we have to go to the book of Isaiah. You just have to. I can't think of a more beautiful book. I can't think of a more hopeful book than Isaiah. This is one of my favorite books in all of Scripture. It is an extremely rich book. It is filled with great passages. And I think out of all of the book of Isaiah, there's a few passages that have, through the years, become especially memorable to us as Christians. And if you've been in church your whole life, there are certain passages that you just know by heart. The one we read at Christmas every year is Isaiah chapter 9. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. Most of us know chapter 6 with the call of Isaiah and the vision of the flying seraphim saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole world is full of His glory." It makes a great song. By the way, the slide I showed you there, that's from the Hagia Sophia. Okay, I don't know what a seraphim looks like, but apparently it was so amazing that Isaiah fell to his feet in worship. Okay, another passage from Isaiah that most of us know is chapter 53. We know the man of sorrows who was pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. And oftentimes we'll read that as a communion passage. It makes a good one. And I hope that the text we're going to read from a moment here in Isaiah chapter 11 is another familiar text to you. That's got incredibly evocative imagery that we turn to when we need a word of hope. Okay, so we're going to study this for a few weeks because Isaiah is a book all about turning from sorrow to hope. In fact, if you're ever feeling depressed and you want to go and read a word from the Lord, go read the end of Isaiah. Start about chapter 55, read all the way through the end of the book. You cannot read those chapters without feeling hope because it's a constant reminder to us that our God reigns. Okay, but before we can get to the passage of hope, before we can get to the familiar text of Isaiah 11, we need to get the reason on the table for why do we need this hope right now. Okay, and I want you to notice the last verses of chapter 10. This is Isaiah 10, starting in verse 33. It says, "See, the Lord Almighty, will lop off the boughs with great power. The lofty trees will be felled, the tall ones will be brought low. He will cut down the forest thickets with an axe. Lebanon will fall before the mighty one." Okay, and I know we're jumping into the middle of the story by going straight to chapter 10, but if you've been reading Isaiah up to this point, you know that God is not talking about cutting down a literal forest. No, this is a metaphor talking about cutting down the great nations. Okay, cutting down the cedars of Lebanon, that was a common idiom in their world for talking about something that can't be done. Okay, several places in Scripture talk about if you could only cut down all the cedars of Lebanon. Okay, but God says that those trees, which could never fall, okay, the nations that we thought would be here forever, will fall. And of course, the people of Judah, God's people, they think that the great nations around them are all behind the destruction, right? Surely the Assyrians, okay, they're the biggest bad guys on the block. They're the biggest source of destruction that the world has ever seen. Okay, but Isaiah is letting them know here in these chapters that it is not true. Okay, it may seem as if Assyria and Egypt and Babylon, they're the ones cutting down the nations. Okay, but Isaiah insists that God is the one really doing the cutting and the burning. Okay, this is not a story about humanity. This is God's story. All these other nations around us are merely tools of the Almighty. He's the one tearing down and destroying the once great forests that represented the strengths of nations, like the mighty empires around us. Now they are being torn down. Okay, so far so good. But the terrifying part of these verses, the reason that you and I need hope, is that the nation he's talking about cutting down at the end of chapter 10 is us. Okay, Jerusalem, The holy city, the city of our God, will fall. Our own people of Israel and Judah are now nothing more than a field of charred and dead stumps. Okay, here's the image. Right, and the great sorrow of this passage is that the once mighty nation of King David, the people of God living in the promised land, the covenant nation, is now just one more burned up and cut down field of death. Okay, and when Isaiah writes these words, there is a king of the house of David sitting on the throne in Jerusalem. Right, God has kept his promise to us to always have a son of David on the throne. Okay, but what we have now is merely a shadow of the mighty things gone by. Okay, the kings that we have are no longer great kings. Okay, things have not turned out like we wanted them to. Right, we keep hoping that the next king will get our nation back on track, right? Maybe the next leader will be the one to lead us back to the glory days. Okay, but every time we get a new king, we keep getting disappointed. Right, and I know I'm taking a lot of time talking about this vision, but I don't want us to skip over this image of destruction. I don't want us to move from Isaiah 10 too quickly. Right, as I read Isaiah, I think this is where most of us are feeling right now here in pandemic mode. Okay, we look around us and we freely admit that things have not worked out the way we wanted them to. Okay, we keep thinking that something will come along to get us back on track, and yet one difficult situation seems to lead right into the other. I know that for many of us, our new reality right now is that we are accustomed to living in disappointments. Earlier this week, I had the bright idea of logging in and checking on my retirement account. 0 out of 10, by the way, I would not recommend it. That was disappointing. Right now, every afternoon, when I go home from my office, the first question I ask my wife when I walk in the door is, how bad was it today? Okay, because I know that with her homeschooling regimen and with my kids just aching to get out and go somewhere, it's not good right now. And my family's problems in this time have been relatively minor. Okay, but I know that some of you are struggling with lost jobs or even lost loved ones. Okay, even if all of the quarantines were to go away tomorrow, life wouldn't go back to normal because that normal doesn't exist anymore. Okay, many of you, even if you haven't caught this virus, you've experienced profound disappointments because of COVID-19. And I know that for a lot of us, what we are experiencing right now is that we're upset and we are grieving over a series of small losses in our lives. But then for a lot of us, we feel guilty that we're upset when we know that other people have it worse off than we do, right? So who am I to complain when I still have a job and my family is healthy? My wife and I will celebrate our 15th anniversary this week. Okay, and we had planned a big overnight getaway. We were going to go up to Helen, and we were really looking forward to it, and yet we had to cancel it. Okay, so that made me sad, but then I feel bad for feeling bad because I know that's such a small thing compared to all the big things that so many other people are dealing with. Okay, does that resonate with anybody else? Okay, and so this is something of an aside, but I think it's important to say. Whatever you have lost in this season, okay, whatever disappointment that you're living in right now, whether it's big or small, I just want you to know that it is appropriate and it is okay for you to grieve that loss. Okay, you should feel something for all your losses. Right? If you're missing watching baseball season right now, or if you're missing seeing your friends at school, or if you're missing working on VBS, or if right now you're missing getting to physically walk across a stage to get your degree, okay, or any number of things that aren't really that big in the grand scheme of things, but they were important to you, okay, then don't feel guilty that you feel grief over that loss. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, we're living in a time of both small and large disappointments that threaten to steal our hope. Okay, so back to our text. Isaiah chapter 10 paints a very bleak picture of people living in disappointment. Okay, and into this world of death and destruction, as God's people are looking around and wondering, is there any hope in this sorrow? And as they cry out, God, where are you? And as we wonder if the only thing we have to look forward to is foreign oppression and war, Isaiah says this. This is chapter 11, starting in verse 1. It says, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. Okay, so here's the image. Out of all the death and destruction, out of this charred field of decay, from one of the lopped off, burned out stumps, God will bring forth new life for his people. Yes, God is behind the destruction, but he is also going to bring new life. That he is promising the people that if they will trust in God, a day is coming where he will send them an ideal leader, and that leader will bring peace. Okay, this is the message of comfort and hope. A gift is coming who will take all of the disappointments away. And I want you to notice especially the qualities of the coming leader described in these verses. Okay, this leader will have the Spirit of God working in him. Okay, he will fear the Lord and pursue righteousness. Okay, but also it says the leader pursues justice. Right? Notice the emphasis in these lines on working behalf of the poor and the needy. Okay, our Savior isn't like what we're used to seeing in the world where power is everything, where the bottom line is the only thing that counts. No, the ideal leader of Isaiah 11, he doesn't work for his own power, his own position. It is servant leadership. He is focused especially on those who don't have any power. And then notice immediately that in the next verses, Isaiah gives us the results of this kind of leadership. Okay, when we get this ideal leader in place, he says, we get peace like we can't even imagine. Okay, notice verse 6. It says, the wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together. And a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together. And the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den. And the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So just a couple days ago, I pulled into the parking lot right behind me, and before I could get out of my car, I looked out my window, and I saw that in the grass right next to me, there was a bird and a snake fighting. Okay, now, the snake was probably 10 inches long, right? Not very big at all. But I am not getting out of my car until that snake is gone. And so it took several minutes, but the bird finally killed the snake and then started eating him right there. Okay, now, why would a bird do that? Okay, well, for one, he's much braver with snakes than I am. Okay, and two, violence is in his nature. Right? Killing and eating are what animals do. Right, but notice the metaphor verses 6 through 9. Okay, the image here is that all of this violence, all this destruction that we are just used to living with will one day give way to peace. Okay, and as I read these verses, I really like the image of the wolf and the lamb living together, right? I like that as an image of peace much more than I like the image of an infant playing near cobras and sticking his hand into a viper's nest. Okay, but I want you to think about the metaphor a minute. Think about the peace that he's promising. Okay, he is promising us that when we get this ideal leader, there will no longer be any violence. Okay, he's promising us a life in which we don't have to worry about harm anymore. He is promising us that our disappointments that we live with now, okay, one day they will all be resolved. All right, notice how the text ends. This is verse 10. It says, in that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. So yes, the people of God are scattered. Yes, hope seems like something unattainable. Yes, we are living in a time of disappointment, but God is still on the throne. God is working his plan, and we know that this plan ends with the redemption of all things. Okay, the ultimate message of Isaiah is that hope is coming. All right, so two things that I want to say about this and two kind of application points about hope as we close. Okay, number one, if you want to live in hope, follow Jesus. Okay, if you want to live with hope, you have to follow Jesus. You know, the main reason that Isaiah chapter 11 is familiar to us as Christians, okay, is that we know that the shoot that comes from the stump of Jesse, the one who will fulfill all righteousness, was born in a manger over 2,000 years ago. Okay, we know that the only leader who can bring us real peace is Jesus. You know, we can't imagine true peace. Often we look at power and we look at oppression and we say, well, that's the way the world is. Okay, but God looks at it and he says, it's not the way it has to be. You know, we know that eventually the lockdowns will end. Some semblance of normal will come back to our society. Okay, but we also know that there will be other storms that come that we can't see that are just over the horizon. You know, I can't imagine not asking, okay, well, what's next? Okay, I can't imagine living in a world in which I don't have to worry about my children's health and well-being. Right? I can't imagine living in a world in which there will be peace in places like the Middle East. Okay, I can't imagine living in a world in which I don't have to struggle with something on a daily basis. And yet that is the image of Isaiah chapter 11. Okay, I can live in hope because I don't belong to myself anymore. I belong to Jesus. If you really want to get hope, it comes from following the right leader. You know, a lot of the world searches for hope and peace in all the wrong places. Okay, because hope is not going to come from getting the right people in office next election, right? I know that we always talk about the next election as if it's the biggest one. I know the election of 2020 will be the biggest one the world has ever seen, right? If we could just get the right guy elected, then we'll have hope. But it's a fool's promise. Okay, I know that hope is not going to come from getting all my finances in order. Okay, I could check my retirement tomorrow and see that I suddenly miraculously have all the money in the world, and that wouldn't give me real peace and hope. Okay, I know that hope is not going to come from bunkering in. It's not going to come from stepping out. No, true hope, true peace can only come from surrendering your life to the Prince of Peace. If you don't follow the right leader, you can't have the right hope. All right, number two. If you want to live in hope, work for justice. You know, I heard on a podcast the other day, there was an interview with a guy, he's a corporate executive, and this is a guy that's made stupid amounts of money, and by any metric you want to throw out, he's had success that you and I can't hardly imagine. Okay, but then this executive, he developed tinnitus, okay, the constant ringing in his ears, and he went to several doctors, and none of the normal treatments were working for him, and his doctor finally told him, this is a pain that's never going to go away in your life. This is something you're going to have to learn how to live with. And so this man went into a great depression. But then one day he decided that even though he was in constant pain, he was going to start volunteering at a food bank. Okay, and this guy is not a Christian. He's not a believer in Jesus at all. Okay, but here's what he said in this interview that really stuck out to me. He said, the only time I could find peace from my suffering is when I was actively working to alleviate the suffering of others. You know, so much of this passage in Isaiah, so much of the prophet's message, okay, is that we are supposed to be a people who work towards justice and helping others. Okay, and the secret to this is that if we are a people who focus on others, we actually end up lessening our own suffering, our own disappointments. Okay, if you really want to be a person of hope, not only will you follow the right leader, okay, but you will take up the work that he came to do, the work of justice. Okay, so what does this look like for you right now? And I think there's several things that we can do even in lockdown. I think we need to do more checking up on each other. I think we need to call the people that you usually sit next to in church, check up on them, see if they're doing okay. Right? And if you're not part of one of our groups, whether it's one of our midweek groups, the men's fellowship group, the ladies' Wednesday night group, or one of our small groups, reach out to us. Okay, this is a time we need to be connected to each other. Also, this is a time, if there's someone in your life who you think could use a message of hope, I would encourage you share the link to to our church website where they can find our sermons and other things so that they can tune in and watch it, right? This is a time where we can invite other people who might not normally show up to church, but they would show up to this digital kind of service, right? We have an opportunity right now to help other people. Okay, so how can each of us right now work towards better serving other people around us? Okay, let us be a people of hope.